Traditionally, the Enlightenment has been viewed as a popular movement that challenged the European status quo through radical philosophy. This movement supposedly came to dominate European society through its outreach to the people, who read philosophical tracts and perused the latest newspapers at their local coffee shops. There is certainly truth to this perspective, but to fully understand the Age of Enlightenment, we must first understand how the vast majority of people actually lived their lives, and what their relationship to the Enlightenment really was. In this video, we're going to look at the relationship between the English lower class and the Enlightenment. If that sounds interesting to you guys, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe and hit the like button. Anyway, let's get into it. The English lower class of the 18th century were a group who generally did not own property, labored to survive, and were very financially insecure. A major aspect of working class life at the time was the poverty that came with it. Living in poverty in 18th century England was rough, an experience that is well illustrated through the story of Margaret Larney. Larney moved to London with her husband Terence around 1750 to try and improve her family's financial situation. She worked as a washer and her husband as a laborer, but their wages were not enough to get by. Therefore, Margaret took to filing coins to supplement her family's income, which was a crime. Unfortunately, Margaret was arrested and put on trial, where a selection of somewhat unreliable evidence led to a guilty verdict and a death sentence. Once Margaret was convicted, it appears that her husband left their family, as shortly after their mother's trial, two of Margaret's kids, Elizabeth and James, were admitted to St. Martin's workhouse. The children, aged 3 and 5, died only a few months later, with Margaret probably not being told of their fate before she was executed. This is a tragic story, and may seem shocking, but the story of crime, poverty, and tragedy was an all too common one in 18th century England. This was the life of many lower class people. Obviously, it was difficult to keep up with Enlightenment literature while living a life of abject poverty, but the lower classes of England did have storytelling culture of their own. We know that oral storytelling was popular among the English lower classes, with ghost stories being very common. This tradition was particularly strong in the countryside. The English poet John Clare, born the son of a farm laborer in 1793, describes the colorful tales his mother told around the fire, some based on oral myths, others on common chapbook stories. Historian Henry Bourne describes the same phenomenon years earlier in 1725. He writes that nothing is commoner in country places than for a whole family in a winter's evening to sit round the fire and tell stories of apparitions and ghosts. Clearly, the oral tradition was still going strong late into the 18th century, although it was not unaffected by growing literacy rates. Literacy rates throughout this period are hard to track, but we can see that the lower classes definitely consumed some literature. As was mentioned, like many kids, some of the tales from Claire's youth came from chapbooks sold by traveling salesmen. With increasing literacy rates, the lower classes did start to buy and read more books, but not usually Enlightenment philosophy. As suggested by Claire's story, during the Age of Enlightenment, cheap chapbooks and almanacs were quite popular among the lower class, especially the rural lower class, and the Enlightenment classics, which we all know today, did not rank among the best sellers. This is not to suggest that these classics were not read at all by the lower class, just that their influence was not pervasive. But this fact, which was well known to intellectuals of the time, did not necessarily bother them. In fact, most Enlightenment thinkers would rather their treatises and pamphlets be kept out of the hands of the masses. The Enlightenment community wanted the masses to receive a certain basic education, but many of them did not think the general population should actually be enlightened. This satirical poem from 1795 illustrates a typical attitude towards the enlightenment of the lower classes. Quote, "You lower class of human race, you working part I mean, how dare you so audacious be to read the works of Paine?" End quote. As this poem suggests, when the lower classes did get their hands on Enlightenment texts, most intellectuals started to get nervous. Many Enlightenment figures were worried that if the masses became enlightened, they would forgo their role at the bottom of the social ladder and try to all become philosophers. Voltaire was constantly ridiculing Paris's class of young, poor, aspiring writers, saying of them that, quote, "Egypt of old had fewer locusts," end quote. Because of this, many Enlightenment figures supported education fitting to one's place in society. This meant several things, but the general idea was that the lower classes should only be educated as much as was necessary to make them productive, useful units of society, and no more. A sizable minority of Enlightenment thinkers did not even want the lower classes to learn how to read. For example, Voltaire once asserted that the children of peasants should remain illiterate. Despite the Enlightenment's focus on combating human ignorance and superstition with science and reason, many of its participants thought it wise to uphold a certain level of ignorance among the lower classes. Kant once said, "Dare to know," but it seems like many of his contemporaries were too apprehensive to promote that idea outside their narrow circle of enlightened gentlemen. Enlightenment thinkers wanted to make sure they could control who was enlightened, and they did a good job ensuring their writings were not popular enough to reach the lower classes. But, as the satirical poem about Thomas Paine suggests, some Enlightenment literature did saturate the general public, particularly when it was aimed at them, as Paine's common sense was. Most Enlightenment thinkers could not see the utility in assisting the enlightenment of the lower classes. Instead, they wished to merely dampen what they saw as the ignorance and superstition of the time. Many enlightened intellectuals thought mass education was, at best, a waste of time, and at worst, downright dangerous. This elitist attitude, along with a popular disdain for the lower classes, generally resulted in the people being rather detached from the Enlightenment. Now, towards the end of the 18th century, there was definitely an increasing awareness of Enlightenment ideas, particularly with the French and American revolutions. But at that point, the movement was already in its later years. Clearly, for most of its existence, the Enlightenment was not a movement of the people. It was primarily restricted to the elites. Whether that was due to the conservative nature of the lower classes or the elitist attitude of many Enlightenment thinkers, well, that's best left up to opinion. And if you have an opinion on it, feel free to comment down below. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I've got more videos on the Enlightenment coming up, particularly a video on the life of Denis Diderot, the creator and editor of the encyclopedia. So, if you're interested, please subscribe and stay tuned for more. See you guys next time.